Welcome here today. I know that many of you have probably already done this in other meetings and so on, but I find it necessary to do also, and that's to acknowledge the terrible events of Christchurch last week. And I think that we all have to acknowledge that the things that did happen is not part of what we're all about, that we do promote understanding, tolerance and togetherness. And so I'd like just a moment of silence to recognise that. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, now at the end of the meeting today, we're going to have Governor's only time with Nadine, so that'll be straight after the meeting. Okay, we move to apologies, and I've got one apology for lateness from Councillor Seymour, and you're what, moving it, eh? Yeah, thank you. Okay, second, Councillor Foster. All in favour say aye. Aye, against carried. Okay. Declarations of interest.
I'll declare a declaration of interest with the Heart of Gisborne.
Sure.
Content.
Yep. Okay, none others. Okay, so we'll move to the minutes. So it's Councillor Dowsing and Councillor Burdett. Anything from anyone around those? If not, I'll put it. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against carried. Okay, if we can move the action sheet and Pauline, any updates from when we last spoke?
No, I think most of it's trying to set out within the actual status of all of those things that are there. Just further meetings that are coming back for the procurement policy back in May, but I think most of the things that are stated is within the action sheet.
Okay, now I did send out an email to councillors informing that I would bring it up in this section of the meeting that I had a request from a councillor that they wanted to know what the spend on local consultants compared with external consultants. So I thought that the easiest way would be that we would just put that on the action sheet. After talking to Pauline, she said there would be a bit of work involved with that. So have you got any discussion around that? Because as I said in the email, it's not a straightforward thing. You just press a button and out comes the result. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I guess I'd question the why we need that information, because external versus local consultants, we're still going outside the organisation for specialty skills that we don't have within. We've got to identify where those skills are available and utilise them. Whilst it's important to support local, we're talking about consultants here. It's not. It's certainly not at a governance level decision that we would choose to use these people.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, no, I think that putting our staff to the time that they're required to do that when we've already got plenty of work to carry on with is unnecessary in that we leave it to their discretion to get the best people for the right job. And I would have total faith that if we had the right people to do the job locally, they would employ that person locally. I think if there's going to be a question with regard to that is consultancy versus in-house expertise, and whether we should be looking at that rather than and just the sheer number of consultants that we're using, and because it just seems like everywhere you go there's another consultant, and whether we need some more expertise in-house, I don't know. So that would be the question I would ask. But with regard to external, local, I wouldn't waste my time on it.
Yeah, of course, part of this issue is covered by our procurement policy, which requires us to look at local, if possible, and in fact give a very small advantage price-wise. But yeah, look, those are good points. But Councillor Arcata Brown, have you got an opinion around that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of the key things that why questions like these are posed to, well, to you in this case, is they are posed to us in the region. At meetings that I attend, there's often the rhetoric that, you know, don't we believe in our own skill base in our own region, because they see some of the costs associated with consultants external. The question asked maybe was perhaps not the right question in this space of looking into, but as you said, the procurement policy does aid that space. But if we're going to build our region's capacity to meet the region's needs, there are a certain amount of people that live here that do have, I believe, the skills, the abilities, but often don't feel they get the opportunities. And we see that sometimes with build tendering. How does a company build its capacity if it doesn't get an opportunity to try a bigger build when a company that's already done bigger builds gets it? So I think what the query for me was just, are we doing justice in this space to those locals that want to, you know, again, apply their skill base? You're right, in our staff capacity, they will look at ensuring they get the right person for the job. But I've just noticed creeping costs in this space around external, you know, consultancy is big money. And I believe that it's time that we do perhaps push it out to the locals to say, well, the skill base we do need, these are some of the lackings we perhaps see, or you know, it gives opportunities for people to grow their skill base and asset around consultancy local. I'm not about just keeping it local by any means, but it's about utilising the strengths of the people that live in our region, who've dedicated their lives to this region, and perhaps don't get a chance sometimes.
Yeah, look, I can understand that the community do ask those questions all the time. And usually those questions come up around election time, you know. But look, what's the general feeling of the committee? I, along with Councillor Thompson, don't want our staff to spend a lot of time sort of bringing in detailed report around this. It could be as little as just giving an very brief overview of the consultant use that we have and the reasons why we use local or external. So, I mean, any new information like that is useful, and what Councillor Thompson brought up is actually a very valid point too. You know, the discussion around the use of internal people as opposed to having to use outside, whether, you know, that's cost effective or raised. Councillor Stolz.
I agree the discussion we've had so far. To me, the question would be, what are we going to do with that information? Are we then going to use that information to change our procurement policy? I don't think that is the question that we're asked. It's, at this stage, I feel it's more information only. Yeah. So to me, if we ask for that information, I think we should ask the right questions. How many consultants are we using? What is the breakup and what are we going to do about it? But just to find out for the sake of it, I do think it's a lot of work for our staff to pull everything together. So as a council, if we want to take a proper look again, and I think we are shortly going to look at our procurement policy. Isn't that coming up sometime? So why don't we wait then when we do our procurement policy and get ask the right questions?
I think that's a fair request. Would you be okay with that? Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's never hugely useful just looking back at what you've always done. It's always good to actually plan what you intend to do in the future or what the opportunities may be. So, okay, we'll leave it around that. That'll be great. Okay. All right, Pauline.
Sorry, just with that, it's number 6. That has actually been completed, that information.
Okay, yep.
Okay.
It's not being sent to council. Have you guys received the email from Gavin with the information?
No, we'd need a copy of it, yeah. Okay, if you can arrange that, it'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on. Governance work plan has only got a space for it, so we move to page. Sorry, I didn't go through all the other things. Leave of absence, acknowledgement of tributes. We should have done that. Public input and petitions, no. Extraordinary business, no. Notice of motion, no. Adjourned business, no. So we're on page 16. Yeah, we've done that, yeah. Okay. Okay, and we in public excluder have got the detail for privacy reasons. It's just, so anything to say about that, Pauline?
No, I think it's pretty much just take it as read. It's just the similar levels as previous years, and we're just following the form of getting approval here. Yeah.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I was just, through the chair, wanting to ask if we had investigated the 16 properties that haven't requested remissions this time. I just wanted to know whether we looked into the 16 properties that hadn't requested a remission this time, because one would imagine they're in similar circumstances. Has it just been through their lack of activity to request the remission, or have they changed what they're doing? 16 seems like an easy number to check.
I'll double check on it, but I think it's because they had the circumstances had changed, and each year they apply based on those kind of things. So they do, yeah, they can come back each time, but it was removed largely because they didn't apply, and each year we do an annual check as well.
It would be fantastic to find out if they've become properties that are active now and not passive, or whether they've just missed the boat and might have needed to.
I will double check on that, but that's normally the process is the annual one, but I'll double check and come back.
Yeah, I think that would be good to know, because it would be nice to know that there are positive changes around that the circumstances have changed, that they are now paying rates. Any other questions or comments around this one? Councillor Arkell-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure this has probably been in a report somewhere, but I'm just today interested to know what portion of Māori freehold land in our region, is it a fair amount, or is it a small percentage? Would we have that information to hand? I mean, I'm sorry.
No, but that is one thing that I was looking that we could actually kind of map as well, and actually get an idea. And as part of the revenue and financing policy review, is actually looking at land-locked areas and sort of seeing that, so you pictorially see across the whole district. And yeah, that is part of definitely on the sort of coming back for that, so you can see. So I can't tell you at the moment, but yeah, I can come back later.
Okay, so is somebody prepared to approve those? You're doing it?
Well, I will answer, but I want to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
What's staff's interpretation of Māori freehold land? Because whether it has one owner, three owners, or 1,000, it's still freehold, can't be sold.
Through the Chair, Māori freehold land is defined as through the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, so we use that definition.
I didn't quite hear that. So are you saying it's registered as Māori land, and that's what qualifies it?
That's right.
Defined by the Act. Okay. Thank you. I'll second it. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Okay, page 23, draft internal audit. Well, Charter. At last, we're gearing up on this.
Yeah, yes. So this is just the terms of reference as a first starting point for this, and this is what that's coming to you. It just shows you that there's the definitions of the internal audit objectives. You've just got to recognise that it is a little bit different than our external audit reporting opinion. As the external audit, this is the internal audit is to focus on the effectiveness of the systems and the accuracy of the management information that you're given, rather than the annual report is the statutory financial statements. But as it said, that there are some overlap when you actually look at the controls and efficiency and effectiveness that they go through. And some of the things, the other nature that internal audit will come is that there is looking at probably effectiveness and efficiencies. Then when you look at processes, that you map it out and see how can we make that more efficient. So that is by one of its nature of an internal audit, not only looking at the risk, and another byproduct of that is looking at effectiveness.
Okay, so in the end, with the work program, there will be itemised in there a program of audit reporting once we get going. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just on page 27, where it just talks about the terms of reference that are prepared for each audit. And I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to start from, because the principles of internal audit should be the same, and yet a project might have different elements, but it does say terms of reference will be prepared for each audit to outline its objectives. Well, that bothered me just a bit, that it was going to be a process that was going to take a lot of time at the front end of any of these internal audits, and most organisations have an internal audit process and the parameters are set up. So how much variance do we think that there might be between one project internal audit and another?
So you're quite correct. You have a standardised process that you go through, and you take that to each and every audit. But what that's talking about is what's in scope, what's out of scope when you do the internal audit. So you may not test everything. You may have certain parameters. So that particular point of time, you have a terms of setting that up at the beginning of that process. So it doesn't go outside of the testing. That is standardised. It is just that you need to define what you're actually looking at within the process.
Supplementary then, are we going to see the terms of reference for internal audit subsequent to this paper? Because otherwise the process will go on forever, because there'll be a new terms of reference being written, as you've just alluded to here, and we won't have confidence that the internal audit process is actually up and running. So is the next step to produce the standardised terms of reference that will be the template for all internal audits?
Like accounting standards, you have standardised processes, and that sits behind any internal audit. That doesn't change. This is just an overall scope of what this and the objectives that internal audit has. So if you looked into a particular area where you would want to look at the controls behind that, you would say, I'm looking into the controls, say, for the process for capital reviewing, and then you would say, this is what's in scope, we're doing it this year, last year. So that's the particular things that you're looking at, but you have the same processes each and every time, and this is the reference with it.
Thank you.
I'm assuming that you would actually have some of those already sorted out, because you are actually already doing internal audits, aren't you? But it's not actually reported to this committee. Councillor Stoltz.
Pauline, our internal audits, do we share our findings with other councils? Because we all do the same business. And I know at Health Board, we sometimes investigate something and a different health board is investigating something totally different, but we share our findings in order for us then to use their recommendations. And because lots of the work we do is exactly the same, a little bit different in our organisation, but in essence, we all do the same business. So I was just wondering, is that something we are considering, where we will share our findings and recommendations with other councils, or is it absolutely just stuff unique to us that we will look into?
There's probably two parts to that. You have obviously the internal audit, which is usually internal audit operations, so that would be unique to us. And then you have what the external audit, that information is collected across all councils, and they're reported what are the findings with those. Then the third part of that is when we benchmark the external benchmark with other councils across Australia and New Zealand. Sometimes you may find out of that there are specific measures that come. you wouldn't share your actual results, but you would share what is actually happening. So specifically not the internal audits, that's more of the operations unique to those, but if you were finding that others and councils were having similar issues, you probably would go to them and see how they resolve those. Thank you.
Robert.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Pauline, I'm just wondering, point number 18 on page 26, the risk profile and risk appetite will determine the priorities. Are we, when you're talking about risks, you're talking about risks of financial control, general risk profile facing the council?
Yes, it's an answer to that. It's a general risk profile that you actually had some of the bow ties and things that have already come to you and saying what the different risk profile of council.
Okay, well, you know, I also note that in the terms of the reference of this committee that, I quote, to ensure that the council has a total assurance picture of its activities in order to allocate the right level of resources to manage the council's overall risk. Now, my concern, I've been asking for some time that council be given a report indicating the risk profile that we face. I specifically mentioned, for example, you know, what are the 5 or even up to 20 most critical risks facing the council at any one time. And, you know, I've drafted something which I have copies of here, but I'm concerned that as a committee, we do not have a handle adequately on the risks facing the council so that we can fulfil our duty to monitor those risks. Thank you.
James.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, take on board your comments, Mr. Hunter. We have got 14 strategic risk areas that we've identified, and we're continuing to work through the bow ties for those, and they will be coming through to this committee. We are currently in the process of securing a new risk advisor to assist with that work. So operationally, we're already starting to look at those, and we will report them to a governance level. So far, the committee has seen the framework, which was quite a large piece of work to ensure that we've got the best framework in place to deal with risk in the organisation. And subsequent to that, you have seen quite a bit of information around asset-related risk in our key asset infrastructure spaces. So the next step is definitely to bring to a governance level our risk profile work. So totally take on board what you're saying there. And there's 14 areas that we've identified as being the most critical risk space for us.
Yes, thank you for that. I think the point I'm making is that this committee has the responsibility to monitor those risks, and up until now, I don't think there's been an adequate understanding of what the risks are. And, you know, I think that this should be treated as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Do you want speaking, James?
No, I agree.
Okay.
And supplementary to that, can I just ask, Mr. Chairman? So the risk that you are referring to, though, is the small note that appears in the Chief Executive's report on projects. And I'm just asking, is that the risk you're referring to? We have a small note in each report that says this project is doing X, Y, and Z and risk, and there's a couple of lines about it, or have you got something more comprehensive that you... Yeah,
no, it is more comprehensive. So obviously across major projects we identify risk, and they are connected to the strategic risk framework that we've got in place. But what we are talking about is 14 key strategic risk areas that we'll report to give that total assurance picture that Mr. Hunt is
supplementary then, exactly that point. Mr. Chairman, can we ask that be an item for the next Finance and Audit Committee meeting, please?
So what do you want exactly?
The report that has just been referred to, that we have 14 of them in place at the moment, and even if it's still being developed, then supplementary to what Mr. Hunter is saying, it is timely to present it to
Yes.
council, even if you're building on it.
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Any more discussion around that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would mention that that report that I've just handed around, it's just sample only off the top of my head. It has no meaning in reality, but just to give an indication of, what I feel would be a useful kind of report for the committee to receive. Thank you.
Okay. So any alterations to the audit charter that anyone's got, or we'll accept as is? I'll move it. Thank you. Second, Councillor Dowsing. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Yeah. So that's a different item. Yeah. On to page 31. Tokamara Bay boat ramp.
I think most of the things are put out and set out into the report, so it's seeking a recommendation of whether a grant is given to the club to cover the application of the resource consent. The other option that they were talking about, if it was saying that it was a council-owned asset, then there is an application to a discount that we have a budget of 10K, but they're the two options on it.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I'm happy to move number 1 and number 3. The reason I'm not going to support providing a grant in this case is that there is no information to support a grant application. If they wanted to make a grant application, they're welcome to. But there's a process involved in that, and we haven't got any of that information here. So I don't feel comfortable just providing a grant on the basis of what we have here. It's not really, I feel, good practice to do these ad hoc and provide any fee waivers at this stage. So I'm happy to move number 1 and 3.
So there'd have to be a seconder there.
If we do that, if we were to do and move it that 1 and 3, that's actually a decision of council, and to undo that decision of council when that information comes requires a notice of motion. It's quite a process. And so the best thing would be to let it lie on the table until such time that that we got that information, that Councillor Dowsing is, and then revisit it rather than having to go through a process and then undo it all.
So based on what Councillor Thompson's saying, actually, he's right, because it's declining a grant. I would be much happier to say note the contents of the report and remove 3 so that they can make an application. Sorry.
Nadine.
Good morning. Through the chair. So my understanding from staff in terms of the grant process was that applications for consent waiver is a decision that needs to come via a committee and not necessarily a grant application form, which is why it was put towards the committee in this way.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that the waiver be granted. On page 32 at 5, it does tell you that the fee is 2,546. Sorry.
Councillor Seymour, just to be fair to Councillor Dowsing, he did put a motion forward, but then was going to alter it. So I need to give him the chance to finish that. So, Councillor Dowsing, have you got a recommendation?
Yes, it was just to note the contents of the report and not preemptively decline.
Okay, so we'll get a seconder for that. Councillor Stoltz. Well, it's just to receive the report at this stage.
It doesn't, yeah, just to note the contents of the report.
Which is the same thing, basically. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Seymour now.
Well, it's just that the Chief Executive just gave us advice that says they need request for waivers must come to this meeting. Isn't that what I just heard you say? So it's not a grant process, thank you. It's a request for a waiver. So I'm not sure whether you want to deal with the motion that you have on the table first, or shall I speak to what I was going to speak to in light of the Chief Executive's advice that she just gave us?
Yes, but there's two things here, isn't it? It's either a waiver of the resource consent fee, or you actually give a grant in lieu of it.
No, the Chief Executive just told us. Could we ask the Chief
I
Executive?
actually couldn't hear you, Nadine.
Again?
So when the request from the club came in, so when the request came in, the advice that, so I put to staff, and the advice is that because it was a waiver of consent, that it should come to the committee.
It's not
I do note that there is, alternatively, the council could decide to give a grant, in which case that would then kick into a grant application process, but there is a stream where you can make a decision to waive the consent fee. So you can actually make a decision today.
Okay. Yeah, so in fact, what happened is exactly valid, that if you only receive the report, it still opens it up for a request for a grant. So that motion's on the table. So if you...
I'll continue then, because we're obviously speaking around that motion, and then you'll get to vote on tomorrow. Okay. So I'll just change the preface. I will be voting against that motion, drawing your attention to the fact that it is only $2,546.75, that the advice is that a waiver request can come to this committee, that it is a public benefit. It actually even says in here at 16 on page 33 that the ownership is unknown. It is something that has been upgraded with public money, supported by ECT, and I think we'll be spending an enormous amount of staff time putting it through yet another process to go for a grant. So I will be moving, if that resolution on the floor fails, that we agree to provide the waiver for that prescribed sum.
Any other speakers around this motion? Councillor Foster.
I'm really aware that any wavering of any resource consents opens up a whole kettle of worms, whether it being for a club that is offering for public good or whatever. So I'm happy to let this lie on the table, but because, like I said, once we start this process and wavering resource consents, it just opens up a kettle of worms of a whole lot of others, and we've got to be really consistent when we make our decisions. So I'm a little bit cautious on this, and I will be certainly supporting the first call of letting it lie on the table at this stage and a possible grant application.
Mr. Chairman, it does say at item 15 there is a provision of $10,000 set aside in council budget for waivers. So if we didn't mean to make some waivers, we wouldn't have put $10,000 aside for them, I imagine.
Councillor Stolz?
I just want you to take that up, that Councillor Seymour just said we've got a pot of $10,000, and also saying it's only $2,000. $2,000 is $2,000, but because we are looking at other similar requests as well, so we just need to be cautious when we say there's a pot of $10,000 available. This is already then taking a quarter of that pot. So I hear what you're saying, but we do need to be cautious when we say stuff like that, because in the end of the day, more requests like these come our way, and we know they come our way every now and then. So I just wanted to state that.
Hang on, I'll just with that 10,000 K provision that's been set aside, it does say it's for building consents associated with council-owned assets, okay? So it's not proven that this is a council asset, even though we may feel that it should be, but Councillor Burdett.
Old ramp was built by the Waikato County, and we took over all the Waikato County assets. There was also further down the road another ramp which we gave to the community of Waimar. So I'm at a loss to understand why this is not a council asset.
Did you want to speak, Councillor Thompson?
Yes, but I'm more confused now. I actually think that there was one side of me saying that resource consents are paid for out of a pool of people who actually do resource consenting. And if we waiver a consent, then the other people applying for resource consents have it put on their account. It's not paid for by the whole community at large. It's paid for out of the resource consenting pot purse, whereas a grant to cover it is paid for by the community at large. So if it's a community asset, then it really should be paid for the community at large. So there's that side of me. Then there's this other one about the public ownership, and I would suggest that Councillor Burdett is correct. It's, you know, if it was done and as a public community asset, then maybe it was our responsibility in the first place to and it probably should be paid for out of some sort of community funding grant rather than the actual resource consent, a waiver on resource consent, so I actually would really like to note it right now and get a whole lot more information because, you know, and get this clarified and with some backing up.
Yeah, look, I can understand your exact dilemma there, but at the end of the day, if the community have taken responsibility for it, I think it's through the granting process that it needs to be done. If we decided that it was a council asset, we should make it a council asset and have a responsibility for it, which would cause more cost to the ratepayers because the community is willing to finance looking after it. But just before you, Councillor Forahunga, I'll just ask Andrew, who's come up here, have you got something further to say around it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do have some further things to say, but whether they're going to help your discussion or not is probably the question. So just background around this, the ownership of the asset. We have always worked on the basis, or in recent years on the basis that this actually is a council asset. And we have undertaken work on this boat ramp over the last few years as well to renew and maintain components of it. Through the resource consent process, there was actually a challenge to where the council actually owned the asset with a local iwi trust actually saying that it belonged to them. And that actually has not been resolved at this point. So we can't say for sure whether it actually is a council asset. But I've been pretty straight up in the report that there is true community benefit with this boat ramp. That's a fact. And it's wonderful that the Fishing and Hunting Club has actually taken on the responsibility and the fundraising and the project management and so forth around this asset to make it more accessible, and we have supported them through that process. So this is kind of the end piece of that process in respect to something that a group in the community has really taken responsibility for the benefit of everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Forahunga.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, we need to clarify ownership of this boat ramp in order to be able to actually decide what we're going to be doing moving forward, because personally, and I hear the sentiments around the table, if this is our boat ramp, then we should be spending our council money on it. But I'm loath to just claim a boat ramp on behalf of council that should be sitting in the community space or the iwi space. And even if it is sitting in that community iwi space, then we do have another mechanism in regards to doing something joint with community in order for the community benefit that Mr. White spoke about. But again, that's an entirely different process. One thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to grants is that we had made a commitment via our Community Development Committee that granting was going to be happening in an entirely different way, and that council's business wasn't actually granting. And to see that there's a paper that has come up and it's actually specifically about grants, it's incongruous to some other things that community development have already spoken about. So I agree with Councillor Dowsing that we actually need to go away and do some proper work, because we need to get, yes, it's 2,000 and some change, but it's about the decision, how we make that decision, how we get there, and are we staying in line with all of the other things that we're doing inside the council business. So I would like to see this lie on the table. I think we do need to have more information back, particularly around ownership. And if we're not the owners, then we need to be having conversations directly with community in regards to this. But I think we can all agree that we want the best for this boat ramp. We also want the best for our community in regards to our conversations we have with them.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question for more speakers? Is there some mechanism of deciding the ownership or declaring the ownership with this? And of course, that would give us a completely clear path as where we'd go from here.
No, I don't believe so. So we've done quite a bit of research through archives around the history of this, and actually Councillor Burdett may actually have more information that we can't find through our archives, given those earlier comments. But I actually think the way to resolve it is actually face-to-face conversation with iwi Trust around history and ownership and benefits of ownership and that sort of thing as well. Now that might actually take some time. Through the chair, no, I'm not thinking about the other boat ramp. I'm taking the feedback that's been received from the community around this particular boat ramp, and the iwi Trust did engage with the Hunting and Fishing Club around this specific boat ramp.
Councillor Arcata-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly this dialogue is quite, it's opened up a whole number of aspects to this particular wavering. And so I had written down three the community benefits of this ramp. We've heard and acknowledged that, because that's a big part of what we try and do as councils, enable communities to enjoy the benefits of assets, and we help alongside them. And then now we're talking about ownership. And that was my first query to this, having that noted in the report. There was uncertainty. We've got some history in the room now around this space. I guess that would be something I'd like to get, obviously in concrete, and as Mr. White has noted, meeting with the iwi Trust to me presents another opportunity around joint management, the agreements that we're looking at and how we better partner with our iwi in these spaces. And I know our council is working hard to constantly work in this space. It's not easy. So I see that the opportunity exists to do that, bearing that they have been doing some work in this space as well. So there is already a partnership as such. But the wavering, following on from Councillor Foster, was we often talk about setting precedents in this space. We know there's a pool of money funding, but what's it determined on? The best case put forward, the best benefit to the whole. What is our waiver when we choose to? What is the terms of reference, I suppose, to determining that 10K pool usage-wise? In this space, I feel there is more work to be done. There's been a little bit more clarity, but I'm still not sitting here sure that we should make the call to waiver, even though there's some legitimate bonuses in that sense. So, more questions?
Right, Nadine, I'm going to ask Nadine to come again in here.
So I just want to, through the chair, clarify that there are two aspects here. There's the issue around ownership of the boat ramp, and then there is the issue around public use of that boat ramp and where council support comes into play. As with other areas around the region in terms of our boat ramp and access into the sea, the council supports that. In this space, we've provided a supporting role, but they're asking us for almost $2,700 waiver and fees, thereabouts. And so when you think, I think the council, the committee should be thinking about that in terms of the wider public benefit, as Mr. White had pointed out, that this boat ramp will be used by the public at large. So not just by that community, but by the region. So I think the ownership is one thing, but as you apply your approach to other places where private ownership is there, but we allow public use, we also provide a fiscal incentive to those landowners too.
Okay. Thank you, Nadine. Okay, who are we up to next? Oh, that's right, Councillor Burdett.
I just want to clarify what Nadine has just said. The former CEO, the late Bob Elliott, in his time, and there would be not many councillors sitting around the table, but the decision was made in the Waimar landing strip to give that to the iwi Trust, to hand over total authority to operate it. The boat ramp opposite the Puka Pub is a community asset via the council and has always been. I mean, this is the first time I've heard there was a question over the ownership. And Nadine's right, because it's widely used, not just by the community in Togo, the community of New Zealand.
Look, I think there's a general feeling that we would like to give the money in one way or another, but not necessarily waiving a consent. So we've still got more speakers. Councillor Stoltz.
I just wanted to say there's a definite feeling that we want to grant them the support. I think what was raised here is that if we don't do it properly, requests like this come to us all the time. So I just want to make sure we follow the proper process, that if something like this comes to us again, we know exactly how to deal with it. So my feeling also is we definitely want to grant or assist in some way, just how we do it needs to be clarified.
That suggests that the staff report is not proper process, because the staff report is laying out that option for us.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, I think that we get a wee bit tied up with this ownership issue, and at the end of the day, we need that ramp there because it's been involved in several just recently, big vessels offshore that have had to be rescued, and that's where they go from, and you know that's the only good place to get into the ocean on that coast for any rescues. Also, it's a great public facility, so somewhere we have to find a way to do this because it is a public facility. Now, the question about ownership, I think we can untangle that a bit, because I know, and we'll go back to an example at Muriwai. The community asked for some playground facilities because they didn't have any. Now, was it reasonable that council provide some playground facilities for the community of Muriwai Little Township? And the answer was clearly yes, because everybody else gets playground facilities. But at Muriwai, there was no council land. And we went through this with Chief Executive Officer Mackenzie when he was here. And so we came up with a solution that the owners of the land, the iwi trust or whatever it was, sign a document that if we provide playground equipment, that it would be available at all times for public use. And therefore it became a public facility, albeit the land on which it was a public use facility, and the ownership didn't really matter so long as it was available at all times for public. So this is what we can do here. We don't need to get into an argument over ownership. We just go to the iwi trust and say, so long as it's available at all times for public use, we'll provide for it.
So taking that into account, rather than just leave it just to receive the report and then go on again,
we should instruct staff to.
Could we not, in fact, change the recommendation to approve a grant of such and such?
That's what it says. Sorry.
Oh, it does say that.
I'll have my right of reply if that's all right, because you speak.
Oh, it does too. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll take right of reply, which is essentially I want to cover off the points we've talked about. And, I don't like the process of granting waivers. It's clear here that we have $10,000 for council owned property, and this isn't identified as council owned property yet. So I don't feel that it's a fit, and so I want to decline the waiver. In terms of the grant, as I mentioned, I believe that they're probably entitled to a grant to support their activity. Although there hasn't been any indication of how much council time has been allocated to them to get them to this stage. Have we already put enough effort into supporting the activity there? But sorry, I'm talking Councillor Seymour. But from the face of this, I would be supportive of a grant application because it has huge public benefit, as has been outlined, and it seems that there's a potential for council ownership that should be considered. In relation to the ownership, I would be happy to have a governance discussion around whether it should be a strategic asset that we take over, or whether it's an asset we'd like to divest to an interested party in the iwi, and ensuring that there's an ongoing relationship there. But that's the level of governance. It's not within this paper to discuss the ownership. So think making the right decision is to decline the waiver and to allow a grant application. The grant application has requirements. We've already outlined those requirements in our process. So if this is to be consistent with our process, then we should decline the waiver. Even we could put a recommendation for them to apply for a grant process, but it's unrequired. Just indicate that we would be supportive of a grant process and allow them to. Thank you.
Is that your right to reply?
Yeah.
So no more speakers. So the recommendation is, and is anyone else going to signal if this one fails?
Councillor Seymour has.
That's to it. So yours is actually to waiver the resource consent.
Yes, consistent with the paper, the advice we've been given, the knowledge of...
Sorry, I had my right of reply has been given.
No, I'm just clarifying. Yeah, but you don't need to go in the background. You just need to tell me what it is. So on the table at the moment is the motion is just to receive the report with the expectation a grant might be applied for with supporting material.
Just one. So I'd retract. Yeah, I've made an amendment to remove number 3.
And Councillor Seymour's will be with the addition of declines. Oh, sorry.
1 and 2A.
Yeah. Yep. Provides a grant.
Councillor Seymour, what will you be moving? 1 and 2A. So it's a grant, not a waiver.
So, yeah.
I'm reading the stuff.
Process. I've had my right of reply. We should put this. It's a lot of discussion.
Okay. So has everyone got it clear?
No, can I just...
Okay, yeah, I'll tell you again what it is. It is that Councillor Dowsing is just removing receipt of the report. Okay. If that fails, Councillor Seymour is moving, and who was the seconder? Oh, Councillor Burdett. That the addition of 2A, that a grant will be.
2A, and I will be adding to it.
That's fine.
Where's the word waiver added? It's not grant. That provides a grant to waiver.
To cover the waiver.
This could have been discussed after we put the motion.
Okay, I'll put the first motion. Okay, all those in favour, put your hands up. This is just noting the report. Okay, against? Was that the same numbers? A casting vote? Well, obviously, I'll put my casting vote in and what I put my hand up for, so it's lost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will then move 1 and 2A, and if you don't want the word waiver in, I'm just conscious of Councillor Dowman's arguments around the word of a grant process, but the council board report is quite clear for us that there is funds available, and yes, everyone's and it does say it's coming out of, in response to Councillor Thompson's comment, within the current budget for discounts or waiver of fees. But it will still have come out from the ratepayers from a whole. It won't have come out from 10 people that were subsequently applying for a resource consent. It will have, the 10K will have come out of our original budgets when we start the process. I can't stress enough, this was actually not a huge amount of work, and the amount of time we've spent debating it. For the benefit of all of you, I've drawn a wee sketch, and that is the sea, and this was the rope ramp, and it went so that you very specifically backed down into the water on an angle and came out of the boat ramp, towing your boat towards Waimar. Correct, Councillor Burdett? This has put a small apron at the top to give access to either turn to the left or to the right when you come off the boat ramp. The Hunting and Fishing Club through their members, made an application to ECT and have had this work professionally completed. They're having a painting bee to paint the railings. It has safety railings on the side, which were part of that project, which previously the council maintained, because I have had occasions to need to ask for the safety rails to be put back. So it is a facility for the community of Tukumara Bay and certainly visitors. It's amazing how many people come and launch their boat there, and it has just made it that much safer being able to pull off the boat ramp on either angle. And as Councillor Thompson says, it does provide access to search and rescue. I just can't believe that we can make a meal out of something so small. So I urge you all to vote for the $2,572 to cover the cost of the fee waiver for something that could have been a council project and we could have chased our tails finding grants for months.
Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, I think if it had been written up as a grant in the first place, I think the difficulty we had is wavering resource consents, and we sort of got this being out on it around resource consents if we start setting precedents around wavering resource consents. If the recommendation had been as simple as provides a grant to assist with the upgrade of the Tukumara Bay Wharf, full stop, then I'm sure we would have been probably finished the meeting by now. So, you know, do we have to put that it's for the resource consent? Couldn't we have just put for the upgrade of the Tukumara Bay Wharf? And I would have totally supported that at that quantum.
Because you've got to be transparent what it's for.
Yeah, that's for the upgrade.
Okay, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I just think that we've set a precedent, and I can just think of other issues that are going to come up, like the Gisborne Yacht Club with their ramp going to the ocean, that they're coming to us to upgrade. There'll be numerous other ones. So now we've waived this resource consent. It's going to set a precedent for everybody, and fair enough too, because we've actually set the tone. So, you know, yeah. Processes, we're always going on about processes, how we should be sticking to our processes, and we've actually just gone off our processes. So it's all, you know, consistency is really important, I believe.
Councillor Arkin-Brown.
I guess, yeah, in due diligence space, points, page 32, points 9 and 10 from the manager of the Consents Regional Profit is that there was a fair amount of engagement and assistance that wasn't charged for, so there was already some discount that happened in this space. And then we have this noted around, you know, how we do this is around a fair and reasonable basis, and if we waiver it, it would be doing so as an exception to normal practice, which will raise a question, as Councillor Foster has said, of fairness in terms of our regulatory processes. So again, we all agree this is a great asset. We've got no issue on that, but our process is now being questioned as far as from here on in. What will be the impacts?
Councillor Porry.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I did want to know if this decision was lost, are we essentially saying that we're not going to support this financially? Because that's not where anyone was at the start of the discussion of this paper. It was about making sure that we got our systems and our information in line first prior to probably kind of coming on board in regards to support of the boat ramp. I'm worried that, yeah, well, actually, prior to me speaking some more, I did want to know, like, if this part of the decision is lost, does that mean that we're making a decision to not support this?
It does mean that, and would it then have to require a process where a certain number of councillors will have to sign that comes back on the table? Robert?
No, sorry, I'd finished. Because in that case, I would be supporting what's on the table, despite us having really bad process in regards to getting to this decision. Because at the end of the day, the conversation hasn't been about whether or not we wanted to support the boat ramp. Everybody around this table wants to support it. What we want to do is have a really robust decision-making process and robust information that comes to us in order for us to be able to effectively make these decisions. And I don't feel that that has happened this time around. So I will be voting for what's on the table because we should be supporting the community, but I do not support the way in which we've come to this decision.
Robert?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that that the staff, the recommendation 2A in front of us, in no way does it say that we are wavering the resource consent fee. It does not set a precedent. It simply gives a recommendation that we provide a grant which happens to be the same amount as the resource consent fee. We are not setting a precedent. I can't see a problem here.
Who's next? Oh, Councillor Thompson.
Look, I think this is actually quite straightforward, and I don't think it's setting precedences. We've just built huge walkways around the city, and the people who walk on them, do we get them to pay for the resource consent? No, it was paid for by the public. They were public facilities, and we don't say to the walking club, oh, you've got to pay for the walkways. We don't say to the cycling clubs, oh, you've got to pay for the new cycleways, resource consents to get the new cycleways built. There's a community group up the coast wanting a little bit of work done on a boat ramp. I know we've been a little bit confused here with the wording, but they want a necessary facility for their community and a necessary facility for the whole of the district because of search and rescue and other things. And so do we say to the cyclists, oh, we'll pay for yours, the walkers will pay for yours, but you pay for yours up there? Wrong. It's a community facility and we have to pay for the thing. Let's just get real, support the thing on the table. I know at the start there were some issues around the wording and we've heard it now, it's explained, let's move on.
Okay, look, we can't keep going on with this forever. We've been talking about it for ages. One last, oh, nothing, okay.
He's asking, are we clear?
Oh, I hope everyone's clear now. Last one, Councillor Dowsey.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Wharehinga, for some clarity around the process going forward in terms of if we don't support this now, it will fail. And because of that, I will be voting in support of this. The concern I have is still around that wording, and as Councillor Thompson says, is on and Councillor Hunter. Sorry, our advisor, Mr. Hunter. As long as we do not provide a waiver, I will be in support. It's been highlighted that would be inconsistent with what we do here. And all I was trying to do in the first place was to ensure that a grant process was followed.
Thank you for that. Okay, so Councillor Seymour, waive your waiver. Anyway, I'm clarifying that it's as worded, just as is. Okay? All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Got there. Morning tea. Okay, we're moving on here. So we're on to page 35 now. Part of Gisborne. Contract. Transfer.
Mr. Chairman, can I declare a conflict of interest because I chair the Camera Trust and have
Thank you.
been involved since it began?
Thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman, can we deal with conflicts with this? Are we going to allow people to vote on that, or can they speak to it, or what's the situation? I think a conflict of interest doesn't necessarily forbid people from being involved. They have to declare it, we have to manage it somehow. So I'd ask for guidance on how we might manage.
Well, in fact, the method that we've been using in this council is that you declare it if you want to. It's up to the individual to do that, and you decide whether, if you want guidance, I would say that there's no issue around this, but Councillor Seymour did say to me that she wouldn't vote on it and wouldn't speak unless asked.
To be fair, she is basing her offer on the basis that she feels that she can't. And would you, and if we,
certainly not a pecuniary interest for me. It is actually an effort, but it's not a pecuniary interest. But I'm happy not to vote, but I will speak to it if there's some random comments that maybe need clarifying.
Yeah, because I'm not making a ruling whether she can vote or not, but I'm saying that she could if she really wanted to. That's up to her. Okay, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, just on the same lines. I mean, I have declared the conflict of interest. I've been a committee member for over 10 years, but I do actually want to offer some input, if I may.
Yeah, well, this is specifically about the camera, the trust. But look, it's really a pecuniary interest that is the real issue here. Okay, I suppose vaguely you have one because you're contributing to the fund, but at the end of the day, I'll let you speak, and it's up to you whether you vote on this. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, it'd be good to get some clarity around that, because Councillor Foster's there in a position of representing the council, as I am at Sport Gisborne representing the council, and the reason that we're there is to be able to come back to this table and give real clarity. So it would seem a bit unusual or ineffective to then not be able to speak about you when you've got that intimate knowledge. So yeah. I think that when we are in positions that with our council hats on, I see that as a bit different, and I think we have got responsibilities to be able to speak about these things.
Thank you. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yes, my opinion is that we have councillors here with a great deal of insight into what we're talking about, and we should utilise that. We're being far too restrictive on ourselves in terms of conflict of interest, not to utilise intelligence that we have at the table. So I have some questions that I'd like to ask these councillors. So to remove them from the conversation would be crazy.
Look, the main thing is that, we are the people that are conflicted, even if they are vaguely, have declared it in the public, and that's the main thing to do. Because the feeling from the public is that things happen behind closed doors, not that we are behind closed doors, but, decisions are made with people that have got inside interests and all the rest of it. But no, it's been declared, it's out in the open, and I'm ruling that all of you can speak.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd still like to, invite them to vote as well, because it's no different to our work groups like the library one that was set up, and they've done all the work, they've done all the, and there's no pecuniary interest, and our navigations project group, they're separate groups. If we were to say, oh, you've got an interest in this, and they have, because it's the same interest, that's all it is, it's the same interest as all our work groups on our projects. And it's exactly the same. Their trust is like a work group on that project, and it happens to be tied. So I would like to actually suggest to them that they are invited, they've declared their interest, we've listened to them, and I would like to invite them to discuss and vote as well if they feel comfortable. But I think they should be invited to vote.
Which is what I said in the beginning. It's up to them to decide whether they vote or not. Councillor Forringer.
To progress our conversation moving forward, I'd like to move 1 to A, like so the recommendations as written. also happy for everyone to participate.
Okay, so that's good. Councillor Forring has moved it. Councillor Burdett has seconded it. So I'll open it up for further discussion, if any. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I just had a question for Councillor Seymour, if she'd indulge me, and it's around whether funding this from the city centre management targeted rate, whether that becomes problematic to extending the reach of the camera trust, whether you can work outside of the borders, for example, on targeting fly tipping down the beach or something like that. If we were to extend the reach of the camera trust, would it need to come from alternative funding?
Yes, I can answer that question. Yes, it would, technically, but we do have other participants. So this is the funding that is coming through the funds that were formerly taken from the targeted rate and made available to Heart of Gisborne. That is not the contribution that the police make, nor that GDC make. So that issue can be covered by using the funding within the targeted area and using other funding outside the targeted area. Any new camera that goes on the system is not paid for by any of this money. This is just operational money and repairs and maintenance money. Any new camera is funded by application to a trust from somewhere. And eventually in a perfect world, council would get to the position of building cameras into its new assets, but that hasn't happened to date because we all struggle to build assets. And so the Camera Trust did make application to ECT for 2 cameras on the building opposite the War Memorial Theatre, and I'm just giving you this as an example because I think it helps everyone to understand. One looks directly down the scene dock on the War Memorial Theatre and Childers Road, down and picks up the entrance to the skate park, and there is a smaller camera that just looks at the parking area because there were some incidents that occurred in that parking area opposite the War Memorial Theatre at night time. So that is outside the internal area that you referred to, and that application was made to ECT and the cameras funded. So that the issue raised can be managed.
Thank you. And just, I think the only other question was, is it the appropriate way to fund it? And it seems like it's exactly the appropriate way to fund it. So I'm in support.
Councillor Harker-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following on a little bit from Councillor Dowsing's commentary, I was out the other night with the police after a venue shuts down and noting the amount of traffic flow onto the streets and some of the untowards that does happen in our CBD. It's the early hours of the morning, and I wanted to know, and adding to Councillor Dowsing's thoughts of, have we got enough in this space of, from the reports from police, that concerns there are some needs in this space based on what they're dealing with in the weekends, and other parts of the region where there is a lot more activity happening at certain times. So, we are acknowledging, first and foremost, thankful to this trust and the work they do. We're grateful that we have people in this community who's generous with their time and often volunteer. But this is a significant kind of concern that has come forward, in certain sectors I've been in touch with recently. So is it likely to grow? Has it got capacity to grow? If it does, obviously managing that's then another issue, but it certainly has come to light that we have got some real needs in light of what police are managing in the weekends and CBD spaces. I wanted to know also is when the cameras aren't working, I know the skate park one for some time, there was some work needed there. Does that budget cover costs of repairs, those factors as well? Because obviously when they work, it's great, but if they don't, then it's unhelpful.
Well, from what I read in the paper, it doesn't cover all costs anyhow, does it? So, yeah, that's right.
Can I just say in response to that? And generally, the police determine exactly where the camera goes. It's very unusual. I mean, you all need to know that there are 5 points wired on the Lawson Field Theatre renovation, but no money allowed for cameras. But generally, so that will be a decision that is made by somebody later if they are to add it to the network. But generally, the police determine based on their crime corridors is the word that they use, and you will have seen what they do need. And can I put a plug in for volunteers. If any councillors in town want to spend some time as a volunteer behind the cameras at night time, we'd love to see you, or our coordinator would love to see you.
You could read your council agendas then. Councillor Foster.
Yeah, just as being a member of Heart of Gisborne for so long, and I just want to commend the Gisborne Crime Prevention Camera Trust for the work that they've done, and it just highlights the fact that, and being a retailer and a building owner in our CBD as well, the effectiveness of it, because over the years, the Camera Trust has really assisted with the security of the CBD late at night, all through different periods of the day and early mornings, and also with shoplifting when it comes to our crime city watch guys. So, it is something that we need to build on in the future, and I would hope that we, the 17,500 is just a small gesture from the rate taken in that area at the moment, which is part of the city centre management area. For this year, with the, I'll get into the next part later, but it's really important that we look at the scope and where it can possibly go to, because we've got a lot of areas that we're doing up at the moment through navigations, and I believe that cameras are a really integral part of what the future of our security of all our areas around the place, because they're the only effective way that you can deter towards activity happening in those areas. And really commend all the volunteers and everything that goes with the Camera Trust, because people don't realise the work that goes on behind the hours. They're there early hours of the morning, these volunteers, and they have to be coordinated. There's a coordinator that coordinates all that as well, Ken Hubert, and I take my hat off to the work that he does. But the other side of it is the Heart of Gisborne transfer going into Activate Tarawhiti. It's been a little bit messy, and I must say that our committee, the Heart of Gisborne committee, is a little bit disjointed at this end, because it is the tail.
You're getting off the topic there. We're dealing just with the Camera Trust and the transfer of funding. Look, I'm going to cut it short here, because look, we've got plenty ahead of us, and I think we need to move on. I think there's a general feeling everyone's going to move on this anyhow. So I've got a mover and a seconder. So all in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Sorry about that, but we have to move on. Okay, page 42.
I'm just going to give you a generic opening with that, and Nick is going to address any of the things for the Environment Service and Protection fees and charges. Just want to note that on the corridor access fees for the roadings, that where the paper that went to council in February, and it gave all the fees and charges, it included corridor access fees with an increase. It's only a recent charge that has been there. Our recommendation is actually to say that it only goes back, increased by the rate of inflation, rather than what was lied on the table in the previous report. The second thing is sometimes we get charges that are direct to council, and we then on-charge it to the users, and one of those is the theatres, where we have electrical charges, and that is a straight charge that we charge onto them. When the paper went up in January, it had the old electricity rate, so we're suggesting that we will update it with what we know now, but we also have wording that says it's subject to change, and maybe updated in a year, and those will be reflected on the website. A third thing that within the paper since the January one was the housing rentals. The housing rentals, which we have noted in here, has a process from the 1st of April to the 31st of March in every year. And that review of those market rents is completed from tenancy services. And so the rates that are currently reflected on the report that lied on the table in January was up until the 31st of March. So the rates that will go into the final report will be the new rates. Okay. I will have, sorry, I normally put it exactly where it is. The housing rentals isn't on this report. We only had the other environmental housing fees. No, you don't have the full one. It would be in the original report. But I can tell you what they were that it said. The original ones in on the council report was $162 and $177. Yes, that is correct. The market rates have been assessed now for from the 1st of April to be, it is going to 162 and 177. It was recorded $145 and $160. I had that around the wrong way. So those are the other changes that we're talking around it, but Nick then just wanted to take a little bit through with regards to.
So, for Councillor Seymour, the housing update is actually DHL on page 203.
Nick, have you got something to add?
Morena Tato, Chair Councillors. I just wanted to take you through the charges as related to the Environmental Services and Protection Hub. As Pauline said, Council considered the paper and was let lie in February, and specifically asked that staff come back to councillors with a clearer explanation of how these fees were derived. So you will see that there are a number of recommendations put to for the committee to consider, and table 6 on page 49 actually goes through those various options. So in terms of the background, I'll just quickly go through the areas that we're actually looking at and then take any questions on that. So under the Local Government Act and also the Resource Management Act, Section 36, we're allowed to recover actual and reasonable fees for the services that we deliver. It's been some time since we've actually looked at those fees. In terms of the health stuff, a decade, and certainly in some of the resource consents, quite a few years that we've actually looked at the cost, because we've only put up cost of living increases, general inflation rates. So this year, what staff actually did was actually go through and looked at the actual time spent to actually deliver these services and made recommendations for those fees. And as a sanity check, went through and looked at what other councillors and unitaries and people in similar situations were actually charging for these fees. So that exercise has been done. And so we rely on these fees basically to run our business, both in times of not only the monitoring of our charges, the consent application, staff process, but also our IT systems and all the stuff that underpins that. And these fees also help us when we do additional work for the community, such as the monitoring around boat ramps and all of it. So if we don't have these fees, we can't do that extra community added benefit that we were required to do. So resource consent fees. So I'll take it to just quickly take you through. So the resource consent fees, and there might have been some misconstrue or misunderstanding that these are actually application or deposit fees, and they truly reflect in terms of giving those people who apply for resource consents or building permits that what they are likely to spend. Any overspend in that amount is given back, but because the fee was so low, it might have created a false impression in terms of, well, they think that's the actual cost of doing that. And as you will see in the appendices, different councils, we're in line with pretty much every council, and some councils go a little bit further and actually put a tier in terms of that. So the basic is around the 800, but then you'll have 1700, and then you'll have quite higher. So depending on that, but we are actually considering the deposit and trying to standardize that across what we're doing, and it's come up to 800. So you have got those comparisons in page 66. Yeah, page 66. The other ones was the building consent application fees. Again, it is a deposit type basis for this approach. Hairdressing and annual registration fees. There's a lot of requirements in terms of legislative changes through MPI and their A grade and effectively B grade fees. So some of that, when they're non-A grade premises and they fall into that, that's the cost of 2 inspections. So where there's been non-compliance. And that actually includes sending information away if they have to send away for some tests, hygiene tests. All of that's actually included in there, in those fees. And Food Act registrations, which is, there are a lot of requirements in terms of our reporting and how we actually do that. So that's just a brief summary of those environmental fees. And I'm sure you've all read the paper in detail. It's a very high interest, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, councillors, any questions there? Councillor Burdett?
What is the average resource charge forestry company before they start cutting the block?
So that,
and this is across the board where they have to do loading all stuff. What would an average charge be?
So the average charge, and I have got some staff here who could put me right if I'm wrong, but that will be in the order of 1,500 to 3,000, depending on the amount of information that's required. Because as you know, with forestry blocks, it might be quite a simple, small lot, but it might be a much bigger application with we're talking thousands of hectares, and depending on how many sites. So often forestry companies might treat it quite differently, and they might have section, like an A, B, and a C section that they do in terms of that harvest. So it is variable, but what we're saying is it will be in the order of thousands. It's not just a simple, and there was that confusion that it's really quite simple. Anything to add in terms of that? That's about the right sort of cost, Lois? Yeah.
Just say that obviously there's a huge difference in scale in some forestry. So it is a lot, people get fined, that kind of stuff. We also receive consents for 1,000 hectare forests. 1,000 hectare forests is going to have a consent fee of more than $3,000 because that's going to require quite a lot of complex analysis. But the majority of our forestry consents will be in that order of 1,500 to 3,000.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Yvonne.
Can you tell me on the appendix around the samples that you gave to us, why are there some that say not applicable to new dwellings in Northland? Is it just that the information wasn't available? Or, it first jumped out of me at alterations in garages, because I know there has been moves to not make the consenting process so punitive. So I trust that's just saying that's not available, not that they don't do it.
Thank you, through Chair. In answer to Councillor Seymour's question, not available. It's very varied in terms of the information that are actually on websites, and some might be 2 or 3 years old, and some are not.
Absolutely fine, thank you. My second question is just an interest one on page 57, where we require consents for the setup and set down of a marquee, which could be a public or a private event. How often would a inspector, I understand really well from having used the service of our local hire company, that they have to be particularly fastidious, and they don't just give you the marquee in a bundle now and let you put it up yourself like you did once. So how often would we actually inspect a marquee consent? Through
you, Chair. Can I actually defer that question to staff to see if they actually have an idea? Ian Petty will answer, our building services manager.
Page, it's on page 57 of 20 in the top box under the Building Act, and it relates to consenting marquee erection.
So the answer is every time. And what we do is we don't look at how they put the marquee up, as Councillor Seymour quite rightly points out. The people are professionals. What we're looking at is fire egress and safety of occupants. So we're not looking at how it goes up, how it goes down. We're making sure that escape paths and flaps are not tied down and things like that. So if there is a fire in an event, that people can get out safely.
Thank you. And then my real deep, meaningful question to you, Mr. Zaman, is I do feel a little uncomfortable when I think I heard you say that there is a bit of built-in these fees for extra community benefit from these fees, where projects for the community can be funded from. And I feel a bit uncomfortable if we're building something into fees to enable us to do some extra community benefit, because that's rates as a whole, not individuals who apply for a resource consent.
Thank you, through Chair. In answer to Councillor Seymour's question, it wasn't an extra built-in. What I'm pointing out that we haven't raised fees for a very long time, and so there are massive deficits in terms of the revenue coming in for staff. If we further have to, if there are no increases, in that, what happens is that the deficits are very large for that in being at staff being able to do that, and so our revenue is very much down, and that is added on top. So that's really clarifying. And for some resource consents and some of that monitoring around that, we don't actually charge in terms of those consents, but the staff will have to respond in terms of overtime. And so it's covering, there's a greater deficit, is what I'm saying. And
I hear all that, so I mean, that's what we would understand an increase of fees should be for, but not to build in.
So you're right.
Extra for community benefit.
It's not really building in. This, as I said, this is actually staff going through and the actual cost of delivering those services for those particular activities.
Okay, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I just further more to what Councillor Seymour has just said. You quite clearly did say this money is also used for extra work, including boat ramps, etc. Monitoring boat, I'll get it right because I've written it down. Monitoring boat ramps, etc. So now you're saying that we've got a deficit. So within that deficit, is there work like monitoring boat ramps included in that deficit? Because we've got to be very clear here that the people who are paying these fees through resource consents, etc., aren't paying for work like boat ramps, and that boat ramps are a public facility. Now, I think you've answered it, but you did quite clearly say it.
Yeah. Yes, through you, Chair. Maybe I'll bring you back with an example. So when these fees also include other systems about our processes and our IT, and they help to subsidize or help to actually pay for those. They are actually used as well. So it's not just staff, it is, and maybe we'll just get away from the staff side of things, but the processes and the IT and all of those systems are reporting our templates. All of these things are paid for those. And when we don't collect the fees to do those, we're behind in all of those systems. So try not to think specifically for staff, but there are, as I said, are occasions, and if what I'm saying is we're further behind in terms of our revenue if we don't increase the fees to allow us to do some of those and not be so far behind. So if I didn't give that clarity or have opened up that discussion.
So what you're saying, Nick, is that if a staff member is working in a specific area where the charges are identified with all their employment, but also with the equipment and resources they're required to actually deliver that, a portion of the charges towards that as well.
And that's exactly right. So you will see later at EPR committee, we've purchased quite a bit of equipment in terms of funding and operating around cameras or mobile apps and IT systems as well. We use that money in terms of revenue to actually put in to do that. We will use those systems, those ease of use, and it also, what I'm saying is the link, it actually benefits the community and in being able to access those.
Okay. Councillor Cranston.
Thank you. I was just struggling to get my head around the actual cost. Sometimes we recently had papers on the cemetery, and it was identified in that the costs, even after the increases, still were well below what the actual costs were in the cemetery. So then when we go to the hairdressing, for example, and there will be kickback on some of these, hairdressing, you sort of said that some of the costs are because when there's stuff needing to be sent away for analysis and that. But surely we've got hairdressers in town that are running a perfectly good operation. They've been there for 15 years and they've had no issues. So I'm just a bit concerned that perhaps it's getting a bit like the dog ownership, where you've got the cost of the poor ownership of dogs, which is being subsidised by the good ownership of dogs. And I just think when you're looking at such a huge increase in the hairdressers, there's probably hairdressers there that have been doing it perfectly fine for years, and now they're in a position where they are subsidising some poor hairdressing practices. So is it on an average basis of that? Yeah, and just the cemetery one is still capped quite low, and I believe that will still be under the actual costs.
Lois.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just in terms of the hairdressers, those are the costs based on what it actually does cost. So we're not cross-subsidising between those hairdressers who are good compliers versus those who need more checks. Those who need more checks get a higher fee. That's the way that they've... And I guess the reason why the fee increase is so large is, in actual fact, those fees have been the same for nearly 10 years. So we haven't reviewed those fees for a long time. And so that's the main reason for the increase. That's a few.
Thank you, Chair. And in addition to those, there's quite stringent in terms of the reporting that we were actually required to do in terms of health-related activities that we monitor. There is comparison. So this is to give Councillor an idea of the actual true cost, and there are some comparisons between other councils as well. As you see, it will vary quite a bit. But we have put quite a few options to councils for them to decide how they might want to address these individual areas. So it is quite clear that in terms of resource consent, it's a deposit fee and there will be a refund. For some of these activity areas, council might choose to, there are a number of options to stage it or to discuss these options. And so Lois has clarified in terms of that we're not rewarding specifically looking in terms of those behaviours. One is related to poor compliance, one is and requires more checks. So they're actually getting 2 checks a year. If they start to comply and everything is good, they then change downgrade. So it's actually looking at how the compliance is related to those and the charges that they get.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. I wanted to have a few questions here, actually. First of all, the affordability of our community hasn't been highlighted in here, so we haven't determined whether our comparisons are fair based on affordability of our community. And when I mention that, I'm specifically saying things like, are our professional fees consistent with that which should be charged in our area, whereas, or are they equivalent to what Auckland's charging for professional fees, for example? It's not highlighted in here whether those fees are set based on our area. The next part is around efficiency. And I would like to know whether we're doing our job as efficiently as possible to reduce the cost to the consumer. For example, you mentioned that IT investment is part of this process, and investment into technology should be done with a return on investment approach. Why are we investing if not to reduce the time involved in processing these fees and reduce the cost to the end user? Because it's 100% user pays as the approach, we should be able to have a very targeted outcome from investing in technology, which is to reduce that reduce the cost. we're not obviously reducing any costs here, so I would question the logic behind the investment. The next is still on efficiency. Do we have the internal knowledge and capacity within our staff to be efficient? Are the demands on our staff too high for them to be processing these in a timely manner? Are they jumping between tasks and not being able to complete accurately? All speculative, but I question whether the staff capacity and capability is leading to good outcomes for the community in terms of processing times. And finally, so that's affordability and efficiency and investment I've mentioned, and then finally the fairness around what charges we're making. For example, there's been a lot of discussion about hairdressers. Well, my partner owns a beautician's business here, and beauticians don't have any regulations, but at the same time we have sharps, we have disinfection, we own autoclaves on site to disinfect our tools. There's a lot more risk in that industry than there is in hairdressing, I can assure you. And yet there's no regulation being done. So, well, the question is fairness, not. So are we applying what is appropriate, or are we applying punitive charges because it's been forced upon us? And and so there's a fairness question as well. And in the end, it all comes back to whether the outcomes for the community members doing these things are correct. And so, yeah, that's my question. Are we applying this fairly? Are we applying it efficiently? Are we applying it affordably? And are we trying to do it better?
Okay, Councillor Towsing, those are all good questions and they're all valid ones, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to investigate that today.
Wasn't that the point of requesting more information?
Well, it wasn't to find out whether we're efficient and all that sort of thing. It's actually, no, the management had come back with us and said, these are the costs of these services we deliver, and we need to significantly, in some areas, raise our charges. And the decision today is, yes, well, we do have to raise charges. It disappoints me a little that we haven't dealt with it for so long. But and the question is, do you want to actually go for what it actually costs, or are you prepared to bring it in over a period of time with raising your charges? You want to put a cap on it, and unfortunately, that's all we're going to be able to deal with today. You can always ask, are you working efficiently? Well, you would probably get the answer back that they believe they are. They've been doing it for a long time, and we're not out of kilter with other councils by the look of it, looking at them. And as to whether we're a low socio-economic area, well, unfortunately, the costs with your staff and IT and all the rest are the same in each area. So, if you don't charge the charges, well, somebody else has got to pick it up who's a ratepayer who may have affordability issues as well. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair. I assume from that you're suggesting that staff don't need to answer that question because it's obviously by the chair. In which case, I would ask why we would highlight particular charges and apply it over time when our policy is revenue recovery. Why would we not just stick with policy? Why would we be debating it? And if that's the case, are we really meddling at an operational level, and we should be working on policy, which is governance? And so we're staging a payment increase is counter to policy, which is revenue recovery user pays at the moment.
But we're addressing your affordability issue, you see.
No, we're not, because my affordability issue was around the fact that we haven't benchmarked our affordability versus other regions.
Yeah, okay, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, Nadine.
Through the chair, so I might just, in terms of the policy position, so if we step back a bit, your financial strategy was about ensuring that the beneficiaries pay for the services that they receive, in which case, if you apply it through our annual fees and charges, this is the actual and true cost that is required to deliver the services for those particular businesses. So I think from that perspective, that what this is doing is actually aligning those true costs, given that we're 10 years behind, and we've looked at what other councils do and have come up with a comparison basis. The affordability issue comes into your overall rate setting when you looked at the 5% maximum limit. So there's two different tests in here. There's around the overall your rates cap, which was 5%, and then you drop down into this one, which is set by your user pays for the service. So this is where this part is applying. In terms of the question that you raised around efficiency, I would rather deal with a discussion about staff capacity, not in public, because there are, it is of a sensitive nature when that's discussed and it comes out. So I'm happy to talk about that at a following.
Thank you for that, Nadine. And just really following on from Councillor Dowsing, I actually was just quickly flicking through to look at our current, our region's income capacity, just online, salary-wise, etc. Because I did note that we don't seem to have a matching of inflation and incomes and all those frameworks that this paper particularly is talking about, raising charges, and we hear that we're a bit behind the eight ball to the majority of our constituents or people in this framework. That would be a kind of well, whose fault is that? And council is often charged with being an enabler, ensuring that we are helping support infrastructure build to get businesses growing and becoming and all of that. And I recently had again another person hit us up saying, you just make everything so hard. And I'm like, no, we're trying out, we're working in this space around resource consents, prices, costs, etc. And so some industries, as noted, it's going to be a bit of a, whoa, this is going to have significant impact. So I guess the balancing of enabling and the certainty that we are meeting the costs that we incur and paying right, it's not easy. And I appreciate Nick that this is high level stuff that we have to get right. And majority of this it's reflecting in the pros the actual costs. And I guess in truth that'll be what the business people need to be hearing is this is the actual costs. These are what we have to pay. These are what it is in the now. But some of those businesses, as I said, haven't had a raise in their income levels. So there's going to be some, I guess, some pushback in this space. So how are we preparing for that in the sense of people saying, look, it's just not, I'm closing my business or that type of discussion, because there will be those that this will come under considerable fire of affordability, but also how do we ensure we're saying this is about enabling, again in that space too. So that's my query.
Okay, Robert.
Yes, I'd just like to ask whether our budgets have anticipated a fee increase in these various areas, or will these be showing as a favourable variance if we adopt them?
So within the long-term plan, you assume that you're going to achieve a certain amount of income. And in order to get that income, it's based on the volume that we've received to date. And then if you multiply it by the old rates, they would not achieve what we said that they would be needing to have. And as part of the overlay of that, there's also a revenue and financing policy where each of the activities have a certain amount of recognition that these are a public good versus private good. And so in each one of those, they might say that there is a 20% public good, which we rate for. The other 80% is what we're saying that we need to achieve in revenue. So yes, this is not going to be a surplus. This is what we're actually saying that we need to achieve what we said that we would be within the long-term plan.
Okay,
Seymour. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say thank you for that. The only other two comments I would have is one, we've got to protect our small businesses. Some of them are very fragile. And two, we must do what we can to encourage the development of our ratepayer base and not put people off subdividing or building new dwellings here, because if if we increase our ratepayer base, it helps everybody. Thank you.
Councillor Seymour.
Commence on 1 July 2019 for the next financial year. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move aspects of this. I would note that the process would have been far better if we'd have workshopped it. We've had it once and lay out on the table. If we could have workshopped it, and I completely support the questions that Councillor Dowsing has asked, but they need to be asked in a different forum to today. So we need to make sure we capture that, because we could have all given this quite a good deal of time, which would have benefited council officers as well as ourselves. That hasn't happened, and we need to move along with it. So my recommendations from this paper is 1 and 2C, because I concur completely about not increasing some of the aspects beyond that 30%. If you look down the column, it shows you what the increases might be. So 1, 2C, 2E and 2F. And I'm so moved.
Councillor Bird, seconds it.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
With these new proposed fees, are they going to manage to be able to, over time, decrease the deficit, or how are we going to manage it to decrease the accrued deficit?
So depending on the activities, some of those we have other activities have set this. If it's a significant amount that needs to be paid back, we would look at what those areas are, and we'd come back to council and say, okay, what is the approach that we take? But like if there was loans that we need to recognise or costs, we put that in a planning program to pay it back. So we would come back as a secondary item if there was significant deficit in some areas.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, you know, if we agree to increase fees for 30% for this particular year, is there any particular areas because we're seeing 150, 200 increases in some of the consent charges in particular. So I would like to make sure that if we're going to cap it at 30% this year, if we can highlight the real urgent ones that have got big increases by them and the reasons why, and we can do them in a separate paper, you know, because the 30% will cover the bulk of what we're increasing, but there's going to be some that are highlighted that are going to be definitely running at a deficit and ratepayer having to be ratepayer funded rather than you know, directly user paid. So
so you want more investigation into those things? Yep. Yeah. Okay. Okay, sorry, Councillor Thompson.
The reason why I asked that is because obviously
put your microphone on.
We've accrued deficits up till now, and those deficits need to be managed and dealt with over time. They need to be put to bed one day somehow. Now, to expect applicants from now on to pay to actually pay for those deficits is wrong. Again, that those deficits really become a community cost. Really, they have to be a community cost. They can't be a cost to those on using the service from now on. So I didn't quite get a clear answer there. You said where there's big deficits, we would come back to council. So does that mean in small ones you would manage them down with the fee system?
In normal situations, if the deficits come and it's an activity and occurred in any particular year, that's where it would lie, and it wouldn't be looking to recoup that in future, because you have swings and roundabouts in any particular year. It's only if there was some significant deficits, and that occurred in 2016-17 when we had an eroding activity, and there was a $4.6 million deficit in that. In that particular case, we said that the recommendation would be we'd treat it as a loan and would come back and we would include it as rating for that in the future. Smaller minor ones, we would normally deal with that in a normally day-to-day basis, as opposed to accept the future users of those services to pay for it. Is that, so only if it's very material that you'd come back.
Okay, I'm conscious that we've got to move on. I'll test that recommendation. Sure.
I wouldn't want our public to think that this fees and charges schedule is putting the fees up 30%. I've just done a quick count, and there's looks to me like 17 line items. And one I was going to pick on particularly to highlight why you wouldn't want to increase it, the percentage it is, and that's the Gisborne District Council public bylaw for mobile hawkers, shops, stalls and itinerant traders. And it's a stall in a public place, currently 17, or for other, which I have $37. That is looking like going to, if you used its full percentage, 127. Now, some of those people might not make $127 in one day. That's on page 62. So if you look out for the column on the right, it caps it at $22 or $48. So I think, acknowledge the work council officers have put into this. So absolutely making clear to our reading public that this is not 30% increase at all, across them at all. A lot of them are quite small. It just brings to our attention how efficiency is so important, and I can't stress enough that I do think we should be looking at all those issues that have been raised in the context of getting to this paper, so that we don't see these kind of increases again every so often, but we should be looking at fees and charges every 2 to 3 years, so that we aren't needing to increase them enormously. And we would hope that with all the technology that we have in this place, that we were getting more cost effective at doing things, but we know that that is an issue. So I just want to stress that's really the issue. We do need to move on. We do need to support council officers, but again, we should have had a workshop on this, and we should be looking at fees and charges and rating and how it's apportioned, just as Ms. Foreman has explained to everyone, as we have done in the past, but we haven't done it for years. And everyone around the table is entitled to understand fully how rates are apportioned and what parts public good and what parts needed to be paid for by the applicant. But I'm happy to support the resolution.
So everyone knows what the motion is? Councillor Seymour?
1 and 2, C, E and F. Yeah, Bill.
Who seconded? Councillor Burdett. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, look, with the committee's permission, I did say to GHL 11 o'clock would be probably dealing with them. So with the committee's permission, I'll change the agenda around so that we can go on to Gisborne Holdings Limited interim report. Everyone okay with that? So can GHL people come up here? Tracy, Sophie and Dave, come up the front here. Okay. Yeah. We need some more seats. Yeah, grab a seat. Welcome. That's good. Okay, welcome to GHL with their interim report. Come closer, Dave. Pauline's going to make it to the room, but she just wants to make one comment before we launch into it. So, councillors, we're on, where is it, page 186.
Yes, there's just one change to the report. On page 188 and item number 11, the last sentence in there referred to a line intangible assets. Actually, that should have been corrected when we had an updated balance sheet report, and that should be removed. So it basically, take that line out, intangible assets decreased by 3 million, that was incorrect. And that's the only change in that paper.
Okay, thank you for that. Righto. So I guess having GHL here is an opportunity to question them about the report. Any questions, councillors? comment?
They've done exceptionally well, and this is a very good financial report.
Yeah, look as though they're all happy there, Dave. I'm going to say anything. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Just my only comment is that I've always advocated for you guys to look into new areas of business and to extend what your current activities are, and it looks like you're doing that really effectively. And it's really good to see that you're able to do the reinvestment and track your capital value above your reinvestment. So it's nice to see you're not sort of going into a deficit to do what you're doing. And yeah, so it looks like a great report. Thank you very much.
Okay, any comments, Dave? How about anything?
No, just we obviously here the other day and laid out for the councillors progress going forward, which is we've got a fairly full year this year already, and we've got quite a few things in the pipeline we spoke about the other day, and a couple others due to commercial sensitivity I can't mention at the moment, but no, we're really happy with the way we're going and the effort that's going into the projects we've got on the plate at the moment. So hopefully short term we'll see some of those a bit more direction on those projects, and hopefully some of them come into fruition. So happy with where we are and how we're treating.
Okay, Robert, any comments, questions? No. Okay. Look, it's going to be a quick session.
Just a quick one.
Oh, Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, it's noted in Chair's report that the forestry was very uneconomical. Is that the same as saying there was a significant loss?
No, I mean, you've got to look at it. There's a lot of, up in the farm, we've got a lot of forward roading that we're having to do. I mean, that is capital work, so it's more in the cash flow that it really is impacting. And we are just really revisiting it at the moment because it's a space that's changing all the time with carbon credits, and we're just making sure that what the strategy when we started harvesting, is it the right thing to continue? You know, what are the pros and cons? What else can we look at? And that's really where we're looking at. I think with forward roading, it does, it's a huge cost. But you have to sort of look at which blocks is that, it's actually putting in place for stuff we haven't harvested yet. So cash flow, not so positive with that, taking that into account, but in terms of profitability of their logging piece, and the harvesting, that's fine. But it's just, as I say, we're sort of taking a breath to really look at how it plays out in carbon with what's happening in the carbon credits and everything else.
Councillor Akahata Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report, and as a couple of others have mentioned, things look great. And I just, clarity for me, I've mentioned this in just individual talks. We've talked a bit today about ownership of some asset in our region, etc. And I'm never really clear. Do you own or do you manage Churchill Park, Motor Camp, that space? Does it come under Waikanae, or is it just a standalone venture that, I mean, I've probably never asked it quite like I am today. So
it's a separate license to operate it on an annual basis that's given to us. That is,
It's under reserve.
I just know it was managed. There was some management from the Waikanae space because I had some engagement here. So is that not quite happening now?
No, that is. So as in terms of GHL has a license to operate. Okay. And as I say, that's been done through the manager at Waikanae Beach for that park. So it's just using whether, myself, so if anyone else in head office was doing it, it's a GHL license, but it's done because it's more akin to Ryan's better with the holiday park managing that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the director of the team, the holding company. Thank you for the effort that we put in to look after our assets on behalf of the community, not just on behalf of us, but on behalf of our whole community. So thank you for that. I'm sure the forestry returns will get better because your investment will be at the front end, and over time you will get to reap the returns. And it's always been known that some of those will not produce the quality of others. So we not going to be too concerned. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to
Okay, Councillor Seymour and Councillor Stolt seconded. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Well, thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry it was such a short visit, but anyway, it's always great to see you.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Okay, see you later. Bye. Okay, we're on page 68. Reg, welcome. Okay, this is obviously could be a contentious issue. Do you want to have any further comments other than what's on your paper?
No, I'm comfortable with the information presented.
Okay, Councillor Cranston.
Do we have a breakdown of the 37,500 as some of it's to hearings, fees and costs, and have the Pistol Club done any assessment of what further legal costs might be in front of them?
Through you, the Chair. I haven't got that with me right now, but I can definitely provide that. That has been part of the invoice that was sent to the Pistol Club. So it does form part of that and information that is in front of them. In terms of the work the Pistol Club has done in regards to future costs with current legal action, I cannot answer that.
Councillor Forrihanger.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'd like to move this report, and I'd like to move 2C that we decline to waive the consent fee, but we recommend that there's a reduction to the consent fee and a time payment arrangement moving forward. The reason why I've settled on 2C is because the Pistol Club is largely in a situation because of council and because of our not great planning in the Gadams Hill area. The complaints that have come in regards to the Pistol Club have come because we allowed residential development to occur around the Pistol Club. And that's our fault. So I feel that us as a council, we bear some of the responsibility that the Pistol Club is in at the moment. They've been quite magnanimous in trying to move and relocate, but they've been just met with resistance everywhere that they've tried to go. So they've tried to do things in order to be able to work with us inside of our plan. To me, this highlights one major thing moving forward that we really need to knuckle down, have a really good spatial plan moving forward, and actually have room and space in our future planning around activities like the Pistol Club, like flying drones, all of these other kind of fringe things that make us part of that make our community our community. Therefore, that's why I think that we should be in that 2C space, because that's, to me, it's a very reasonable middle ground. Pistol Club have incurred some of their own costs, and we need to have a discussion around how we can come on board in regards to this, and also make arrangements for time payments.
Okay. Councillor Brown.
Again, we've just had that massive discussion before, so let's not go backwards. But in point 14, there is no budget to cover the waiving of consent fees on this report. The other paper said we had $10,000 in this space. So can we? Sorry,
can that be clarified? We have got a fund.
So the clarification point is where it's a council-owned asset, and this one is not.
Thank you for the clarity. I hear Councillor Wharahinga's discussion around this, and it is a difficult space based on, again, historically and the movement forward. What's the impact of that decision in respect to the best outcomes? Because we're often trying to, again, get what's best for whole. moving forward, and legitimately they're still in this get until space. They haven't found somewhere else just yet. In our spatial planning discussionings, is this going to be, I'm not sure if you know anyway, but where are we heading with this? Because we still have residents, concerns to be heard in this space. But I'm just cognizant that it's a tough, it's not an easy fix-wise. So what's best for all in this space with your recommendation?
Through you, the Chair, I can't comment on the spatial plan context because I'm providing input, as with a number of staff from across the organisation, into the spatial plan progression, but I don't have the coverage to be able to provide that, nor the understanding of that. In regards to the going forward for the Pistol Club, it is currently under appeal. The decision is currently under appeal, and that has to go through that process in itself in regards to further costs and implications in association with the neighbours and how that interacts with each other, that being the operation of the Pistol Club and the amenity that's afforded to those residents. So it's now at that level in regards to the Environment Court appeal.
Councillor Craston?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Wharehenga that we have made it a little bit difficult for them, but I'm struggling a little bit with C because it doesn't tell me what we're up for. So no. Council accepts a reduction of the consent fee, and on a quantum of 37,500, I've got no idea what that might look like. So until I've got clarity around what that might look like,
can we have an answer to that? What's being proposed?
Thank you, through the chair. I think that's really a discussion with the Pistol Club.
Yep.
And what might suit them, but that's definitely a discussion to have with the Pistol Club in terms of what those type of payments might look like.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I mean, this just highlights actually, I would actually promote that we let this lie on the table because there's obviously more information that's required. There's also the situation with the police and their ability to help fund this as well, because they're a major user of this particular area. Yeah, and also it does highlight the need for a noise park, and that's all part of our spatial plan for the future. But, getting back to this, I need to have more information before I can make a really sound decision. So I would promote that we let it lie on the table until that information comes through. We've got to wait for the length of the resource consent. Not quite sure what the length of that is that they've got at the moment, and also the outcome of the Environment Court hearing. And so there's all these things that are going on at the moment. If we start making a decision, we've already made a bit of a bad decision in the past from allowing dwellings and everything in that particular area, and it's all coming back to haunt us. So I just need a little bit more information before I can soundly make a good judgment on this.
Councillor Stolz.
I agree with what Councillor Wharehenga earlier stated. For me, if we go with C, what we are saying is we are recognising that we also played a part way back in this whole process where we allowed a residential development around where the Pistol Club was, and there were indication then that they will move, and that never worked out for several different reasons. Some that we were a little bit involved in, some that is totally outside of our realm. But with C, we are saying we recognise that we also played a role, but I would ask of the mover if we would then say, change C a little bit to say staff will come back with us once they've spoken to the Pistol Club. And like Councillor Foster earlier said, I know for a fact that the police also use that range, and that they're very supportive, and that they also might make a small financial contribution. So I would like for us to reach out to them, but also be cognizant of the fact that we cannot produce $33,000 worth of payment, that somewhere a charge was raised for that. But then maybe just wait till staff can come back with us and maybe arrange a time payment schedule and what the type of fee would look like.
Okay, look, I'll just say one thing at this juncture. Okay, if that's the feeling that, council has some culpability in this, well, what about the residents that are there? you could say the same for them. And that's the issue that I find a bit difficult. If you're giving it to one side of the party, why wouldn't you give it to the other? Well, we gave permission for those residences to go there. So you could say, well, council's got some culpability on that as well. And they're incurring fees for, you know, fighting consents and so on. So here we are, we've got both parties that have been affected by council's decisions. So I'm a little worried about that. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Can I ask for a point of clarity? Was this resource consent only triggered because they had to move back to this site? And if they had continuous use, then they wouldn't have had to go through this resource consent?
Through the chair, no, that's not correct. This consent review was initiated in 2014, prior to the move and any discussion about it.
So this would have happened regardless. Can you clarify the perceived bias as to why council didn't undertake the resolution review? Why was there a perceived bias there?
In regards to the decision making?
So yeah, decisions and options, page 70 on number 5, given the complexities of the consent review and to avoid perception of bias, council engaged 4 independent experts to process the review. I'm wondering why, what the perceived bias was.
Yeah, through the chair, this was all subject to a paper that was presented when we appointed the independent commissioner to hear the matter. The land and ownership is council reserve. Council have received petitions or declarations, I think is the appropriate wording, from the Pistol Club in the past in regards to support with movement from the current site to an alternative site. There was financial assistance provided and agreed in regards to that. So for a number of those reasons, and it's clear from my perspective that it could be perceived that council is part of it. So that's why we went to independent processing of the consent as well as independent commissioners.
Okay, so it was based on a perception that we may be overly supportive of the club because we had previous arrangements with them trying to assist in the resource consent for another area. Is that how I can understand that?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it's more than a perception in that there were definite relationships and undertakings given by council, and so those perceptions I believe were real, and hence we went down that path.
So if there was perceived or potential bias, has this affected the cost to the Pistol Club based on that perceived or potential bias? Would this have been more cost effective if council was able to deliver the resource consent themselves?
Through you, Mr. Chair, difficult to actually quantify on the fly. Just reflecting on the amount of work that was undertaken in it, in terms of the legal advice that we were required, given the complexity, given the noise issues that we needed to face, and the fact that we don't have that expertise in-house, we were requiring that input and support to be provided. In regards to the planning processing of it, you could say that we could have, that may have been a lesser cost for that. I'm stuck on the fence on that one, because actually it was quite complex consent. The level of work that was undertaken I thought was fair, and in reflection of it, there's already an amount of work that hasn't been identified, that was not recorded in regards to the work prior to 2017. So yeah, sorry, it's not an exact answer, it's the best I've got.
What I'm driving towards is that this paper isn't about previous actions, although we have created a situation where there's people against this resource consent. This is around the fairness of the fees that have been charged, and what I'm driving at is, are the fees appropriate for the work that has been delivered in terms of, would that have been fair regardless of past history? Would it have been actioned regardless of past history? Is this resource consent just the cost of doing business in this for this club? And if that is the case, then I'm happy to charge them that amount. Now, the fact that we've created a potential conflict in the area with residents is outside of the scope of this paper, in my opinion. But it's so yeah, I think you gave me the answer, and that you couldn't quantify whether it would be less or more, and it's likely you would have needed a lot of the same consultants to do a lot of the same work, regardless of if it was delivered by council or independents. As we've identified earlier, our professional fees are $150 per hour, so we would likely have spent a similar quantity of time and money on doing this. So whilst I'm very sympathetic of the charges, if they are fair, then I'm also supportive of the charges.
Yeah, when we initially were looking at this, it was well identified that this is absolutely more suited to be a rural activity. Have they absolutely exhausted all options of looking at rural activity? I know it's just kind of a step backwards, but I still believe that if it's not relocated rurally, it's going to be problematic forever.
Through the chair, it is my understanding that there was a comprehensive review with council back in 2015 on land that was available through the council for this type of activity. My understanding since this that they have not been sitting idly on it, that they've been actually looking at GHL and any land holdings that they potentially may have that they could operate on. But really they would need to answer that. That's just what I've heard from the club secretary, but they would be able to attest to that more.
Councillor Burdett.
Thank you. Look, this has been with us since Lindsay Mackenzie's time. I have a degree of sympathy. I also understand that they've been pretty compliant, but in terms of a solution, I don't think the rural sector, where they were going to go, was the right place. But, you know, from where we are now, that's a huge cost in front of them. We've had deputations here from both the Pistol Club and those residents up there, and it's got quite acrimonious in some respects. I just would like to see us resolve this, but I don't know that the 37,000 is in their capacity at present, given that the police have not supported them. They said they would and they won't. So, yeah, I'm just thinking, you know, maybe we need to take a lead here and give some direction, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, last one, Councillor Thompson.
Look, Mr. Chairman, I'm hearing at the table that there is sympathy with 2C, but I'm also hearing that there's some concern about there's no numbers or that involved. So how about we run with 2C and then scrub D out and change D, and that staff enter into discussion with the Pistol Club and confirm the outcome to council for final decision. So like that means that we know what sort of money they've discussed, we know, and so that gives us the confidence when the time comes that we've got the facts and details that a couple of people have sort of suggested that they feel put off here just letting a carte blanche discussion occur and so I would say that would be a way to move it on, and if the mover of if the mover's happy to add that to his moving, then I think that would be a way to move on.
Yeah, who was the seconder? Yeah, I thought so. So, in fact, there is no seconder at this time. Well, yeah, if it was true standing orders, it would have lapsed. But anyway, and I was surprised when she went out of the room. I thought she seconded it. She should have raised it at the time. But anyway, Councillor Stoltz is seconding it, and you can have your right to reply.
Thank you. I think to me, the issue on the table isn't actually about the cost, about the $37,000 figure. It's actually about the principle of the matter. And I think the the rationale is a little bit faulty when we start saying, are we responsible for this in regards to the residents? Because actually, for me, it's about the existing activity. There was already a pre-existing activity there, and our plans changed the environment within which that activity was occurring, and that's our fault. The resident stuff came post that. They were moving into a place where an activity already existed. So we actually have an obligation to that prior activity that was there. I'm absolutely happy for staff to bring back that detail. I think that's absolutely where we want to go to moving forward. And however, that recommendation needs to change in order to reflect that. I'm happy for that to happen. That's actually what I have to say in regards to this. I would like to actually ask for us to vote on this by division as well, because it's quite an important decision.
Okay, I'll put the motion all in. Yeah, it's 1C. Okay, those in favour, hands up. Okay, we can add that, yep. Okay, hands up, who's supporting it? Yeah, I'll put the motion.
What are we doing now?
Well, we're putting the motion with the extra bits just that Heather just read out. Okay, let's have it again then. And in fact, it should be on the microphone because you can't hear it on the live streaming.
So it's 2C, declines the request to waive the consent fee but recommends that council accepts a reduction of the consent fee in a time payment arrangement. And D, which has been changed to instructs the chief executive to negotiate with the Gisborne Pistol Club and leaves the final decision with the council.
Just a point of clarity, can we remove any reference to D because we have a D in the report? It can be just one paragraph.
Yeah, you can put it all in one motion. Okay, so everyone's clear on it now? Okay, hands up, who's for it? No, I'm not voting for it. You're right, yeah, against? 3. Passed. Okay, right, next one. On to 74. Thanks, Reg and Nick. Seem to have contentious issues this morning. Takes a lot longer. Okay, yeah, the Botlas, you're moving it, Councillor Burdett. Second, and Councillor Arkada-Brown. There's no comment around that. I think there was a request from memory around some direction about Botlas. You wanted that, didn't you, Nadine? Didn't it say in the report somewhere you wanted some input around, well, actually, I'll just say to you, yeah, we've been using Botlas for quite a while now. There's been quite a few initiatives that have been used and so on. It's starting to worry me that we've built up in the organisation an administration sort of arm of it, and of course the low-hanging fruit is going to become less and less. And so in the end, you start to worry that your costs are going to outrun your benefits. And of course, a lot of the initiatives they're looking at can be just 1 or 2 or maybe 3 councils that will put money into it to develop it more. But that's still, the administration side of it overall is still having to be supported by all the joint councils. So I just want you to keep reassessing whether, you know, it's cost effective for us to keep in that organisation. Councillor Arkada-Brown.
Yeah, I echo your sentiment, Mr. Chair, because I guess like all things, we need to be cognizant of the benefits, costs to our region. I did find it just an interesting note where the community engagement hat, it says that there's no community engagement around the decision of the councils. Is that just that this collective have, just come together and the 9 that represented just worked together? So if anyone else would like to join or come off, that's just a negotiated space in that space.
So the council is a shareholder in the company and I'm the director on behalf of the council, and that's the same with all the other councils. So the chief executives from the representative councils become the director, and that's resolved. So it is an entity set up similarly to how you have how we have GHL. Yeah, so that you don't have community involvement in that, and you don't switch it out. Your directors are appointed, in which case it's the chief executives from the representative councils.
Okay, all in receipt of that report say aye. Aye. Against, carried. On to financial report 107. Seconder, Councillor Horringer. I'll just make one comment around it. As the works show a capital works program and all the rest, and the next report, which is a Treasury report, shows that the debt is at 52.7 million, okay? So we're slightly above budget. And year end is external debt is somewhere around 53 million. But there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work is on those graphs shows there's lots to catch up before year end. So my question is, how will we get on with that debt? Is that we're still going to be sticking to our forecast year end debt, or is all this extra work going to incur more debt?
So just a bit of the clarification with that, and you're quite right, the Treasury report, which is on 122, it says it's currently 52.7 million. That is a year, and it says a budget, but it's a budget of a year-to-date budget. So the phasing of that budget, the full year budget is 62 million.
Oh, 62. Yeah. Okay. Why did I say 53? But we will be able to stick within that limit?
It is still forecast to be.
Okay. Yep. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. My part was just on page 115, the notes to the statement of financial position. There's some big variances on the statement of financial position, and the notes don't go any way to explaining those. For example, we have a variation of 10 million in our trade and other payables, note 7, and yet the note actually just explains what trade and other payables are. So it's not a note on the actual figures; it's a note on what trades payable are. So there wasn't much clarity provided by that note page, but no big issue, just for future notes. Make sure that. The other one was on page 120, and it's a conversation we've had many times, but just to point out again that we've still got some fairly some fairly high goals for what we're tracking for the rest of the year. We've acknowledged several times since I've been on council that we can pretty much only deliver around $30 million in capital works a year, and yet we still are targeting to accelerate it, double our spending rate over the next few months to regain some ground. It's highly unrealistic that based on previous year's data, that we'll achieve that. So realistic targets and goals need to be managed. And then on 121, again, there's some huge variances there in the tracking of some spends, and not necessarily identifying shortfalls and where we can be making improvements. For example, with your stormwater spending, we can see it's been very stagnant for the previous few months, and how do where's the note on what improvements will be made in that area to get back up to spending. But we've discussed some of those things in other reports, but just to add clarity to this. Thank you.
Okay. All in favour of receive the report, say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Treasury report 122. Move with Councillor Burdett, I'll second it. Any questions, comments? Robert.
Well, just one question. On page 123, which is the actual forecast borrowings, the 17-18 year finishes on this 43 million, but then the start of the next year starts from 55 million, so it's sort of
this is a timeline, and so effectively where you've got the June on the left-hand side, that's the 30th of June. But when you start at the next month in July, that's 31st of July. So it's the movements within that month. If you actually had this as a continuum going through, you would see the movements that actually went from one to the other, but we're trying to do comparatives against a timeline of the months, and that's where you get,
So you're saying that there's what, about a $12 million jump in that period? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just that it's missing possibly the steepest gradient in the annual process. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Okay, local government funding agency. Moved by who? Councillor Dowsing, second by Councillor Foster. Any questions around that? Okay, all in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Rightio. Quarterly activity report. 200. Okay. What have we got to talk about there? Anything that you need to tell us, Pauline?
No, I don't. I think they're pretty much as read. There's nothing out of the difference or the norm that's already been covered, or it's in the actual description of the 3 sections, which is the commercial operations. It's talking about the support services and governance and democracy, which is the integrative report at this time.
Okay, Councillor Cranston.
Community housing on page 203. Is the maintenance budget a flexible budget? Because it was allocated at 200 and something per annum, but there was a lot of work to be done at that stage, and a lot of that work has been done. So is that looked at every year, that budget?
So I didn't catch the first. Is that
We
a flexible?
We allocate to GHL a maintenance budget for community housing, which is 250,000 or so. And the reason we did that was because a lot of them needed upgrading. So over the last 5 years, probably, they've been doing that upgrading, or since they started. Most of that upgrading has been done. So I would expect that number should be going down now, because it's more a budget that's not required, because they've put in the heat pumps, they've done the carpeting, and a lot of those community houses are now in pretty good nick. So what happens with that is
they do assess it each year, but as a long term, we would get where they are as the requirements of their maintenance, and then also the renewals, where that sits. And does it reduce because they've done a significant one? It is at, they haven't increased it significantly. It's only been the rate of inflation, but I will be expecting the sort of the next 3 years, what they plan and what is actually planned and what are the costs associated with that. Yeah, so that can come back. That can come back.
Councillor Carter-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just having a little side commentary with Mr. Hunting in respect to the investment GHL have put into the Waikanai. At what point would we look at return on that investment? as far as reporting, because we know they need time. We've built these new units, and the park, the Waikanae motor, it's, you know, considerable assets in it. You know, at what point should we see an increase at, or, you know, as far as what they've invested, and a report to that ilk? I'm just, is it an annual thing, or do we give them more time?
So they have the annual report, and we just had today the interim report, and so they have the ability to come back and report on those sort of things. There's also a monthly that they have, which is not formal, but as part of your statement of intent, which is coming up for renewal, and you would have seen two other statement of intents within this agenda. And one of them was the local government, the LGFA, and they also have quarterly reports. So you could have the ability to state within your statement of intent if you wanted increased segment reporting or information of updates, which was more formal as opposed to the talking to the thing. So that's two options that you could have if you wanted to increase what you currently have.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only report that we're going to get with respect to that makes any sense will be the annual report, because it's a very seasonal activity, and you know, if they do reports through this winter, that won't show a return on the investment. So the annual report's the one that'll be the one that we will measure it by.
Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yeah, just clarity on that. We have in the past requested segmented reporting from them in the annual report, so we should be able to track the increase in profitability of the services over time.
Good. Okay. Did we move and second it? No, we didn't. I'll move receive the report. Second to Councillor Arkata-Brown. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carry. Okay. Now we're going to public excluded just to deal with those couple of public excluded items. So I'll move into public excluded. Seeing to Councillor Burdett. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carry. Okay, just going to those bits.
Mr. Chairman, the first item here are these in relation to the Maori freehold land.
Yeah.
Right. It does show that very small blocks of land with very low value, because most of the money just making the UATC. So they are very, very, very low value.